We'll go to Wall Street now, where stocks tumbled and oil prices surged in the wake of Israel's strikes on Iran. The Dow down over 700 points as tensions heighten in the region of some of the world's top oil producers. Investors braced for a spike in prices to rattle the global market and potentially drive up inflation. So let's get to a look at the top 500 stocks. This is our interactive heat map brought to you by FinViz, and you can see just a sea of red happening right now. Let's bring in CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady to walk us through the reaction on Wall Street. Hi, Kelly.
Hey there, Jules. Yeah, so the Dow finished down 1.8%, and it's not as bad as it could have been. You know, this wasn't one of the days that we saw back in April, but it does reflect a lot of investor uncertainty. You've heard me use that word a lot when it comes to tariffs. It becomes even more clear when we are talking about an escalating geopolitical situation and potentially large-scale conflict. Now, there are always winners and losers. Even in situations like these, the defense stocks and the energy stocks, those had really good days, Lockheed Martin in particular. But what I will note is we're going to be watching the market over the next few weeks as this conflict sort of plays out between these two nations. I will go back to Russia and Ukraine, the very beginning of that war. We saw something similar in the markets. There was a lot of volatility for a number of weeks, and then it calmed down once investors felt more comfortable that it wasn't going to expand beyond those two countries. And so that's really what investors are trying to understand. Is this going to stay contained to Israel and Iran, or is it going to go further? And you're going to see some uncertainty until that picture becomes more clear, Jules.
So, Kelly, what does this mean for oil prices and inflation?
Yeah, this is where it hits home, really, because oil prices, Iran is a top 10 oil producer, and it has also in the past threatened to block a very critical passageway called the Strait of Hormuz. That's where 30% of the oil in the world travels through. Remember, a lot of other Middle Eastern nations are big oil producers. Oil is traded on a global market, supply and demand. It is simple economics. If there is a threat to that supply, then prices are going to go up. And that's why you saw them jump over 8% versus last night. So that means gas prices could go up within a few weeks if we continue to see that upward trend. But inflation more broadly is also on the table here because oil prices drive diesel prices. Trucks run on diesel, and how do your groceries and my Amazon packages and pretty much everything get from the ships and the trains to the stores where we buy them? It's trucks. And so that's why when you see oil prices go up and diesel prices go up as well, that's the canary in the coal mine when it comes to inflation. I go back to the Russia-Ukraine war that summer of 2022. That's when we saw record gas prices and 9% inflation. So if things continue this way, that's a big concern for a lot of businesses in the Federal Reserve, Jules.
All right, good information. Kelly O'Grady. Kelly, thank you. Israeli airstrikes in multiple locations across Iran sent oil prices soaring. All eyes are on the Strait of Hormuz, a key shipping route that handles approximately a quarter of the world's oil trade by sea. It connects the Persian Gulf, which is a vital waterway for Saudi Arabia, to the Gulf of Oman and the Indian Ocean. It's also a vital route for top oil-producing countries like the United Arab Emirates, Oman, and Iran, and it runs parallel to the Red Sea. One reason for oil prices spiking is this route's vulnerability. Iran has threatened to block the strait before, yet never followed through. If it makes good on its threats, oil prices would skyrocket and shipments would remain stranded. The Strait of Hormuz is also viewed as a very important choke point. That means it's particularly vulnerable to disruptions, and there are very few alternative routes. Hormuz is the second most important choke point in the world. 20.9 million barrels of crude oil and petroleum products were transported through it per day in 2023. By comparison, the Suez Canal transported just 8.8 million barrels. Only Saudi Arabia and the UAE have the crude oil pipelines which can circumvent the route through Hormuz. According to official U.S. sources, these pipelines could accommodate 2.6 million barrels per day if there is a supply disruption. A worst-case scenario, such as closure of the Strait of Hormuz or a disruption to Iran's 2.1 million barrels per day in exports, could have serious implications for global oil supply and inflation expectations. That's Charu Chanana, Chief Investment Strategist at Saxo Markets in Singapore. If disruptions persist toward the end of the year, we could see Brent trading to record highs. surpassing the record high of close to $150 in 2008, says Warren Peterson, head of commodities at energy company ING. However, Iran hasn't closed off the Strait of Hormuz, and that's unlikely to happen because it would also prevent Iran from exporting its own crude and petroleum products. Though that doesn't mean the passageway doesn't have any problems. In 2024, Iranian naval forces seized an Israeli ship on this route, and in 2019, they seized a British tanker.
Trump administration issued its first comment stressing, "We are not involved." A close ally to Israel and in the middle of nuclear talks with Iran, the U.S. was already in a position to be pulled into what comes next. Iran suspending talks with the U.S. indefinitely, claiming the attacks were carried out with the cooperation, coordination, or at least they say, a green light from the United States, saying the U.S. must be held accountable. President Trump telling Reuters, "We knew everything and I tried to save Iran humiliation and death. I tried to save them very hard because I would have loved to have seen a deal worked out. They can still work out a deal, however. It's not too late." Members of Congress are wary of a regional conflict breaking out, but are showing different levels of concern about U.S. forces getting involved. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham says Iranian officials who survived Israel's initial strikes should agree to abandon their nuclear program. Quote, "If not, America, the greatest power for good on earth, should be all in to help Israel finish the job." Top Democrat on the Senate Armed Services Committee, Jack Reed, calling Israel's actions a reckless escalation. He says, "I urge both nations to show immediate restraint, and I call on President Trump and our international partners to press for diplomatic de-escalation before this crisis spirals further out of control." It's inevitable the U.S. will feel an economic impact from this conflict. Stocks were down Friday over the geopolitical instability, and oil prices saw an immediate spike. Gas Buddy's Patrick DeHaan tells me he expects gas prices to rise 10 to 25 cents over the next couple of weeks.
Conflict increases risk of oil flows being disrupted. The degree of what happens from here on out depends on the degree in which Iran responds, or if Israel escalates the situation and has new attacks.
So far, de-escalation seems out of the question. In Washington, I'm Atra El-Nashar reporting.